On a Friday night in 1609, a brawl broke out near the Spanish Steps in Rome. People fell to the ground bleeding. One man was stabbed so badly he died, all because of a painting. This wasn't your typical teenage gallery hopping outing. And it wasn't even the first time something like this had happened over art. But who were these people? Why did they care so much about a painting? And what was so special about that artwork anyway? The answer is Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, possibly the greatest painter of all time, or maybe the worst person to ever pick up a paintbrush. Let's find out why. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, or just Caravaggio, was born in 1571 in a small Italian village. His father was a well-to-do nobleman, but his mother Lucia was an impoverished peasant. He grew up with his mom after she remarried and became known as the painter's older brother. When he was around 13 years old, he ran away from home and moved to Milan to become a painter. His father had forbidden him to pursue painting, probably because it was considered a low-class profession at the time. While there, he trained under an artist named Simone Pietrosano, who taught him the basics. But their relationship fell apart when Caravaggio murdered Pietrosano's son. So he fled to Venice and then Rome. In Rome, he found work painting backgrounds for wealthy merchants and started earning a name for himself, especially because of his unusual technique. Unlike other painters, he didn't plan his paintings out or draw them first. Instead, he would just start painting directly onto the canvas. He also didn't really care about pretty colors or smooth transitions. He wanted his work to be realistic, even if that meant adding blurry details or painting right over mistakes. One day, he met Cardinal Francesco del Monte, a patron of the arts, and painted a couple of pictures for him, including one of a sick Madonna. It was so realistic that Del Monte brought his sick nephew over to the painting, thinking it could cure him. When that didn't happen, Del Monte purchased the painting anyway. This was around 1593 and kicked off Caravaggio's career. He was mainly hired to paint religious works at first, like altarpieces for churches, but during the day he would sneak out to taverns and brothels, where he would have affairs and get into fights. He was also bisexual, which was illegal at the time, and would sometimes pay men to pretend to be his servants so no one would know they were his lovers. But despite all that, he was still very religious. Not the kind to go to church every Sunday, pray on his knees, type of religious. He believed God gave him a gift and that it was his duty to use it. He was also very dramatic and emotional, and threw tantrums when he didn't get his way. Sometimes he would even beat himself until he bled if he thought his paintings weren't good enough. Around 1594, he completed a painting called The Calling of St. Matthew, which showed Jesus calling a tax collector to be one of his disciples. Many people thought it was too realistic. They said it made Jesus look like a beggar, and Matthew look like a gangster. But many others loved it, especially the fact that he didn't make Matthew a martyr, but just an average guy. In 1597, Caravaggio went to Naples to paint an altarpiece of the Virgin and Child with St. Anne for the Church of St. But after completing it, they said it looked too much like a brothel scene and refused to accept it. So he put it in a warehouse and headed back to Rome, only to return to Naples 3 years later and find that the painting had been stolen. So now, without a job and with rent due, he decided to steal a sculpture from a prominent bishop to sell it. But he got caught, arrested, and thrown in jail. After paying a hefty fine, he was set free, but he had to flee Naples again and return to Rome in disgrace. It was around this time that he painted one of his most famous pieces, The Adoration of the Shepherds, depicting the biblical story of when shepherds visited baby Jesus. What makes it so special is that he depicted them as actual shepherds, not perfect and pretty people like everyone else did. Again, he chose regular, imperfect people and animals for his religious scenes, which some loved and others hated. Now, because he had a reputation as a thief and a violent criminal, no one would hire him to paint anything. So he spent his days traveling the countryside looking for work and sleeping in barns. To survive, he made money by creating fake relics and selling them to unsuspecting buyers. Then in 1603, he returned to Rome, where he painted a series of 4 works called the 7 Works of Mercy. They were a huge hit and were purchased by the Spanish crown, allowing him to finally make a decent living. He painted portraits of the Spanish royal family and was invited to the palace to paint a fresco of the triumph of the Catholic faith. But soon after, he began to live recklessly again, spending lavishly and having tons of affairs. He was also incredibly jealous and would often berate his patrons in public. Eventually, the Spanish crown revoked his noble title and banned him from painting anymore. But he kept living like a king and spent all of his money and was back to being poor. Now, he needed to come up with a new source of income, so he decided to open his house as an inn. Remember that painting he made of the Adoration of the Shepherds? Well, he ripped it apart because he thought he could do better. Then he recreated it with even more dramatic lighting and more detail. He added 2 figures from mythology, Aurora and Zephyrus, to represent the east and represented by a palm tree. He also added a cloud above the heads of the shepherds to frame the painting. He took the original version to a merchant named Ciriaco Mattei and tried to sell it to him, saying it was a copy of the newer version. But Mattei saw through this and eventually agreed to buy it. But he said he would only purchase it if Caravaggio signed it, proving it was authentic. Now Caravaggio didn't want to sell his own work, but he needed the money, so he agreed. He signed it, then ripped it up again and painted another version. This time, he added more light to the scene, bringing more attention to the baby Jesus. He took this one to Mate and told him it was the last version and demanded double the amount of money. Mate knew this was a trick, but he wanted the painting anyway, so he paid up. Caravaggio then sold the next version to a friend of Mate's and told him the same lie. He signed it so his friend would believe it was authentic. Then he painted another version and sold it to the wealthy French ambassador. He didn't sign this one, but when the ambassador saw it, he demanded the original. Soon, there were 6 versions floating around, with Caravaggio keeping the best one for himself. Unfortunately, he needed the money from the sale, so he pawned it to a jeweler named Antonio de Vica, along with another painting, Judith beheading, but he quickly realized that he missed his paintings and went to de Vico to get them back. But the jeweler refused unless he paid his debt, so Caravaggio begged him for a chance to paint another masterpiece to pay off his debt. And de Vico agreed. Soon, he had finished another painting of David with Goliath's head at his feet. He took it to de Vica, who immediately noticed that it was a fake and refused to accept it. Enraged, Caravaggio grabbed a knife and lunged at de Vica, who screamed for help. Soon, armed guards busted into the room and arrested Caravaggio. He was thrown in jail, where he spent 3 months. After being released, he learned that the painting was slashed and damaged, so he went to de Vica to fix it. They couldn't agree on a price, though, and Caravaggio stormed out. That's when he ran into 2 men, Ascanio and Benedetto Conti, who were brothers, and both claimed that they were the rightful owners of the painting. There was a huge fight that ended with Benedetto stabbed to death. The Conti brothers were noblemen, so the police didn't want to get involved. But their sister, Anna, sought revenge and lured Caravaggio to a spot near the Spanish Steps, where she and her friends jumped him and beat him up. To escape, he ran to a nearby oratorio, where he collapsed and died of wounds and exhaustion at the age of 38. Thanks for watching.